Good morning and welcome to Resources and Governance Scrutiny Committee. Do we have any urgent business?
None received, Chair.
Any appeals?
Again, none received, Chair.
Any interest to declare? Thank you. Can someone move the minutes of the previous meeting?
Move, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Second them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. Then the first thing on the agenda is the government spending review, and we've had a very helpful brief report from the Deputy Chief Executive and City Treasurer. And if anyone has any questions on that, would they like to ask them now? Then I think it probably just remains for me to say thank you very much for an informative report. It's really helpful to have a bit of a steer as to where we're up to with that. And setting of the council tax base and business rate shares for budget setting purposes in 2021. Does anyone have any questions about that? Councillor Simcock.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, can I just give my best wishes to the officers who are going to be dealing with this. And only reading the report, you realise what an amazingly complex set of calculations they're going to be making over the next few months. And I just want to wish them all the very best in doing that. The question I had was relates to page 19 of the report, which is 3.8. We talk here about the council tax base for 2021 as being 118,000 properties. I just wondered, that was in November 2019, if I'm reading this correctly. I just wondered if we have a rough idea of how many properties there are for the council tax base for November 2020. Just a rough idea. I realise it won't be totally precise. Thank you.
Chair, do you want me to comment on that? We have more than a rough idea. I don't have the exact figure in front of me. We track the number of council tax premises that we have in each band, and we have to do a return at the end of October, I think it is, which sets out the latest position. We have the added complexity of trying to forecast, because it's not just the number of physical properties, and I do know it has gone up this year, the numbers of exemptions for various reasons, particularly student exemptions. So one of the reasons why we always do this as a key decision in January is to have the latest information possible around student population and number of exemptions. And as you can imagine, that's even more complex this year.
Yeah, I imagine it is extremely complex.
Sorry, the figure was, Chair?
I think I confirmed I didn't have the latest figure in front of me. Happy to share it, but it is likely to change before we set the council tax base.
Thank you very much. Is everyone comfortable with me exempting the various decisions from Culley in due course?
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed. Thank you very much.
Chair, sorry.
Yes, Councillor.
I think I'm just right on this, because Councillor Simcock asked about number of properties. I think it's correct on the council tax base. Council tax base, whilst it's identified as a number of properties, actually isn't the number of properties because of exemptions and other factors.
Thank you for that clarification. Then can I suggest we move swiftly on to the discretionary housing payments report? Does anyone want to introduce this?
Morning everyone, this is Julie Price. There's nothing to add. I'll take the report as read and take any questions. It's one that you asked for as a result of the budget savings last time. I've tried to give some more detail.
Yes, and thank you very much for what is, and it always is from your service, and we're always really grateful. It's always a really high quality, really comprehensive report. So thank you very much for that.
It's probably worth saying, Councillor Russell, I've got Matthew Hassall, who's much closer to the detail, who head of corporate assessment who will be able to answer more detailed questions. I've been all things business rates in the past month or so, so Matthew's much closer to the detail.
And yeah, and thank you very much for that work as well, because gosh, businesses across the city are really grateful for everything that you've been doing. So thanks for that too. And Matthew, thank you very much and welcome this morning. I understand that Councillor Simcock had a point to raise about the report.
Just one very quick question, Chair. On page 11, I can see that the registered providers, the percentage of cases relating to the registered providers has risen significantly. I just wondered what the underlying reasons for that were.
Good morning, it's Matthew Hassall. Councillor Simcock, can you just point me to which section on the report that is? I haven't got the numbered pages in front of me, my apologies.
I beg your pardon, sorry. It's 4.2, talks about awards by tenure type.
Thank you, Councillor.
And I'm referencing that back to a previous table which basically shows that the number of cases on registered providers has risen significantly. Just wondered why that was.
Just checking back to the previous council homeless. Boom, boom, boom. Awards to date. I would say it basically, in terms of, so we've got £900,000 showing, haven't we, in table 4.2, and the earlier point is showing 750,000 and then 800,000. I would say it is in large part due to the proportions of the payments, because overall they've reduced, and the proportion that's gone towards homelessness cases has reduced by quite some extent. That has, if you like, sort of bumped up the proportion which is going into registered provider cases. Outside of that, there isn't any sort of specific detail I can offer. We just seek to meet the demand that we identify and look to make payments based on those cases where we can see that the need is being evidenced and that we need to get the money out to residents. Good question, but I think that the proportionality element of it is a substantial factor that is making this look like a bigger change in spend than is actually sort of really the case. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you very much for that response, and I can see where you're coming from with regard to the reduction in cases relating to homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you.
I understand Councillor Clay may be having some difficulties. There's Councillor Clay. Councillor Clay, I understand you may have had a terminology point to make on this report, and I know that Councillor Stanton did as well. So Councillor Stanton, do you want to come in first and then Councillor Clay?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I am a fan of our reports being written in accessible language and language that the public would understand them by, and there are a few repeat references actually in the reports to under occupancy and to houses being too large and not being possible to receive benefits because of that. And I'd like to be clear actually, I think we all call that the bedroom tax, and it's important to call it the bedroom tax because that is what it is. It is a tax introduced by the Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition to punitively target the least well off, which seems to be a group of people that have an almost spiritual disdain for and desire to push further and further into poverty. And when I flick further down the report to section 6, if you just bear with me a moment and I'll do so, when it talks about, spare me a second, Chair, when it talks about opportunities to better manage the budget and individual residents having to make better decisions around how to manage their household budgets so as not to require the DHB. That isn't possible. People in receipt of this benefit are not in receipt of it because they would like to be. I'm absolutely sure that it's because they would need to be, and they have no choice to reduce costs. So I just want to be very, very careful on the terminology, that we're absolutely sure that we refer to it as what it is and don't let any change from that slip into our terminology. Thanks, Chair.
I understand Councillor Leese would like to come in.
Apologies, I can't get my camera to work at the moment.
It's
but I will
working.
in a minute.
Councillor Leese, your camera is working, but you look like you're muted, although I can hear you, which is strange.
One second.
He's on there twice, Chair. We can see him on one camera and we can hear him on another.
Okay, you can now see and hear me on the same thing. Sorry, I've just had to swear the camera seems to keep stopping on the another machine, so I'll put another machine on. I just want to comment really on the terminology that whilst Councillor Stanton is entirely correct, is that once we start using political terminology, that's something we can use as members, but not something that officers can necessarily use when they're writing reports. So I think we just need to be careful to make that distinction.
Thank you. I think I said, Councillor Clay, do you have a question on this report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So I think when we look at some of the commentary in the report, obviously we do have many people that are currently accessing DHB, and that is vital for preventing an increase in homelessness. But if we look towards the bottom of the report when we're considering the implications of possible cuts to this budget, what is quite clear is that what it's proposing is additional rationing of something which we may need in the future. So, we're talking about carefully managing awards, but it would also mean that we were less generous in some areas. Now, the concern I have is that we have currently a claimant count which has doubled since the pandemic began, and we know that there is increasing economic difficulty. Therefore, what I would suggest is that rather than taking any money out of this budget now, we should wait until we see what happens in the new year, when the possibility of further homelessness and evictions arising from rent arrears caused by the economic crisis will increase, and that this is not the time really to make those decisions. We should actually see what the outputs are later on. So we did have a letter from Andy Burnham and Paul Dennett on behalf of the 10 authorities saying that we were concerned that there would be a homelessness crisis of the like not seen since the 1930s that was sent to government earlier this year. So I do think that we shouldn't really be taking this risk at that time. So I'm wondering if the leader or any officers would like to make any comments on where they think homelessness will go in the next financial year, and if we should be maybe considering that before making any decision to remove money from this budget.
I think, Chair, that Councillor Clay has a serious point, and indeed the report at the moment indicates that to maintain the current level of intervention, that we are likely to have an over budget next year of between £500,000 and £1 million, but that's also caveated within the report as well. What we don't do is budget in hope. If we think there is a risk around, that's for contingencies, not for the budget. The budget itself should be about as an accurate reflection as we can get. But certainly, where it lies within that range is something that we can't take until the new year. I think there is also a recognition that whilst we can almost certainly reduce the budget for 21-22, that it may be in subsequent years that we have to increase it again, because we don't know what will happen, particularly with universal credit and local housing allowance. And clearly, if they fail to keep pace with inflation, then we will have to compensate for that. But this is, we are talking about 1 year budget here. And whilst I don't think we can have an accurate assessment yet near the time, we ought to make sure that the budget reflects reality, and that ought to allow a reduction for at least for that 1 year of the scale that's talked about within the report.
I believe actually that Councillor Simcock has a question that's pertinent to some of the things that you've just said, Councillor Leese. So if you'd like to come in now, Councillor Simcock.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think that point about universal credit is absolutely fundamental to this, isn't it? Clearly, what we need from the government is a firm commitment that that £20 payment will continue next year. And I'd just like to know what we as a council are doing to represent that point of view with government. Thank you.
I think that's absolutely right, and clearly we are and continue to lobby through, particularly through the local government association, but through other avenues like the core cities that we have access to. But I think for that, the most significant route is through the local government association.
Councillor Wheeler, I understand you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. The leader touched on it, which was the question of contingency. Now, it appears that we're essentially lowering the amount in the pot because it's underspent. And to some extent, I understand this being an administrative aspect of you want the budget to reflect the reality. But given the situation that we're in, if it is lowered and then we get 7-8 months through the year and it turns out that the pressures are higher, what contingencies are there to put more money into it? And indeed, if we don't lower it and it turns out the pressures are higher, what contingencies are there to put more money into it? Because I'm less concerned if this is an on-paper change, but we can put more money in if the pressures are there, than I am that this cut means that we could run out of money 7-8 months into the next financial year.
The council always maintains a contingency for basically unallocated budgets contingency. We wouldn't identify it against one specific thing because there may be other reasons why we need to put more money in as well. And that's a decision we make at that time. But certainly, question, would there be money available in the budget? Then yes, there would.
I had a very specific question around page 12. I think it's the last, apologies, it's under paragraph 4.2. And it says that there are long-standing issues with submitting timely housing benefit claims for temporary accommodation cases, and the high rent levels that apply mean that arrears can develop rapidly. I was concerned by that, and I wondered what processes we had in place within the homelessness service. Because if we're looking at temporary accommodation, it is people who we're having quite a bit of engagement with. So I'm wondering how this is arising, but I appreciate possibly there may not be anyone on the call who can answer that question, but if someone could try.
Matthew's done quite a lot of work supporting homelessness to try and get timely claims, so it's probably worth Matthew coming in and telling you what they've been doing to try and get homelessness staff to ensure that claims are completed timely. I think one of the issues this year has been actually making contact with people and going into people's homes to get evidence and things. So I think this year there has been issues, but it is a long-term issue of trying to get claims, timely claims when people are in dispersed and temporary accommodation. So Matthew, is there anything you want to add?
Thank you, Julie, and thank you for the question, Councillor Russell. Yes, we have fortnightly meetings with homelessness colleagues, and we've been having those probably for coming on for a year now, and have a very long-standing relationship at an operational and a strategic level with homelessness. And it has always been an area of difficulty. And I think over the years I've come to understand that an element of that is because the expertise in respect of understanding precisely what is required in terms of making a successful benefit claim sits within the corporate assessment service. And so we try to sort of provide a greater level of support and make ourselves more available these days to the homelessness service and colleagues to provide the right advice and guidance and backing to that function. But there seems to be a continuing tension between the level of demand of homelessness and the direction and focus that they are able to put into making timely and complete applications for housing benefit or for universal credit housing costs. and those then being put through to our service in a completed and timely fashion. So it has proven a very tricky area to fully overcome, and we're still sort of working closely with colleagues and have been asked again to sort of speak further in respect of looking to see whether there is more that can be done to address this issue in a firmer and I think a longer standing way. It's difficult to give detail right now, and I wouldn't wish to speak on behalf of my homelessness colleagues in terms of how they view all elements of this, but we really do understand that this is an important issue, and we care about it first and foremost from the residents' point of view in terms of preventing arrears being developed for them. Secondly, in terms of the council budget and the impact it can have on money that we are not bringing in, which we could otherwise do. It is something that we very, very much want to be able to get on top of. I don't know how well that answers your question, but it's an honest reflection of how I understand the situation as it is.
Thank you very much. I think that it might be helpful if we had a follow-up note, because I don't doubt that this is more complicated and difficult than it looks to me on the basis of a piece of paper, because if it was easy, it would be working as well as it should be already. But from what you're describing, some of the money that we're spending on discretionary housing payment is money that we could just be getting from the government in the first place. And I'd really rather, and it's clear to me that everyone else would really rather be doing that. So maybe it would be helpful if we could have a note that explained what the scale is at the moment of the amount of our discretionary housing payment that is being allocated to this, and what the scale of unachieved benefit claim is, because obviously if it's also pushing residents into debt, that's also, well, you've said yourself, I mean, that's catastrophic. So I think maybe a note to the committee about that from homelessness would be really helpful. Are there other questions? I understand that Councillor Ali has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. A very comprehensive report. My question is fairly short. In terms of the homeless team and the people supporting our homeless people in the city, I just want to ask the question, is there enough manpower there, enough resources are there? Because in terms of farsightedness and all the statistics and the reports are saying to us that there'll be more homeless people. So are we able to kind of provide that support for those and the resources round? So that's my question. Are we developing, or are we looking at increasing the support? Because we're looking at cutting a lot of support in the coming months. So that's my question. Thank you, Chair.
I think, Chair, there is a report going to Neighbourhood Scrutiny tomorrow looking at homelessness. So I think the extent to which we have answers that will be in the report, I'll draw Councillor Ali's attention to that report. From a budgetary point of view, it is slightly more complex because although government funding is rather unpredictable about when it's going to come and how much it's going to come, in the spending review, a further item for homelessness was identified, but we don't know what the allocation of that will be. I think the point about maximising housing benefit and doing it as quickly and promptly as possible is absolutely right, but that is something that the team have been, I think as Matthew has described, trying to for some time.
Thank you very much. I don't believe there are any further questions on this report, so it just remains for us to consider the officer proposals to reduce the council's contribution in the context of the council's wider financial position. I think it is indicated in this report that the proposal had been to cut this more dramatically, but there's an option, in fact, to maintain the reduced contribution So the proposal originally was to remove 1.5 million of the £2 million additional council contribution to DHP. There is a possibility that we could maintain the contribution at between £500,000 and £1 million. What I haven't been clear about from this report, and it was a question I raised in the previous committee, although the report is very comprehensive in many ways, is whether we've ever done any analysis of roughly what would happen to some of these people if we didn't maintain this contribution, and what the potential knock-on costs of that would be. So I think I'd maintain my previous position, which is I suspect that if we take money out of this budget in significant amounts, that what we will see is just increased homelessness costs further down the line, and that those are so remarkably expensive and that it's in danger of being a false economy. Therefore, I'd invite the committee to join me in recommending that we maintain our contribution at £1 million, noting that that will still be less than the £2 million that we set aside last year, but is closer to approximately what we actually spent last year. Certainly, Councillor Leese.
Yeah, sorry, I know you're in the middle of recommendation. Just wanted to make one comment on that. From when the finance brief, I'm fairly comfortable with that. That's where I would want to be, i.e. maintaining the level of service. I think we probably ought to do a piece of work, because if we look at other local authorities, some of whom have similar homelessness problems, is that they've obviously found other routes. We're not going to be able to do it in time for this year's budget, but I think there is a case for doing a deeper analysis of what is happening in other local authority areas, so that we understand it properly.
I'm sure none of us would quibble with that. So can I move the recommendation that we keep spending at £1 million on this particular budget?
Agreed.
All in favour?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Can we please move on to the report about the Customer Service Centre?
I'll do a very, very brief introduction, Chair. As we know, following the restrictions with COVID, we had to change the model we were delivering customer service across the city, both face-to-face and over the phone. And it was an appropriate time to actually look at how we're delivering that in general. And the report sets out some of the options that are in there and then are being discussed. We're joined still by Julie Price, who's Head of Customer Service, Director of Customer Service and Transactions, and Lee Owen, who will go through some of the reports and be happy, all of us, to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I understand Councillor Lantry has a question.
Well, it's not a question, Chair. It's a comment on language, and it's page 39 in the report. And I think it's where we need to be very clear about the services that we are offering. It's in the bullet points. Sorry, I'm finding it now. And yes, right at the very bottom in the bullet points, and it's third one down, it says signing services. Now, I know this is picky, but I'm assuming that is either BSL or sign language services rather than a signing service to sign something. People who use BSL, English is not necessarily their first language, and to have something that is not quite right might make them think that there is not a service for them, as their understanding of the word signing may be slightly out of kilter. So if that's the case, can we be sure that that is a BSL or sign language service? Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we use signing is because there's a range of different signing languages that people who need who sign use. So we use that collectively. If we're better directed to use specifics, then we'll change it. We're constantly trying to get the word in and as most sort of respectfully and appropriate as possible. So yeah, happy to change anything like that.
I think therefore it's just sign language services may cover, BSL may cover Makaton and any other, I'm not sure there are any, but any other sign languages that might be used locally.
Okay, yeah, we'll change it.
Thank you very much. Can I suggest that Councillor Stanton asks a question first, please, and then Councillor Simcock?
Thank you, Chair. A quick point followed by a question. I've been scribbling on my papers today, and I've drawn a big circle around Didsbury Library, which I've noticed isn't one of the libraries earmarked for video conferencing, so I just wondered if we could have a look at that. But separately, on the budget impacts, there's a reference to the overall impact on the staffing budget, but it doesn't speak outside of the staffing budget, and I'm sure there will be some associated non-staffing costs and savings. So I just wondered if in second provision that could be introduced into the paper.
Lee may want to come in. The 3 libraries where we're doing video conferencing are just piloting it. We've moved really, really quickly within the COVID restrictions. So if we can make it work in these 3 libraries and residents appreciate it. Lee was telling me this morning, the way we're setting it up is very good. When a resident goes into the room, the member of staff will set it up. They don't even have to press anything before they start speaking to somebody. So if we can make it easy to use, that works for residents. That means that they can go to the local library rather than coming into the town hall. They can speak to somebody. Our staff can use document imaging. They can both see the same thing. We can have a reasonable result, and it works for both residents and staff. Then we want to extend it. We also looked at the costs, and Lee was saying it was around £5,000 for the video conferencing, for the licensing. So fairly limited costs associated with it. Lee, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So yeah, in terms of the 3 locations and libraries, that is very much just the first pilot scheme, and those are the libraries which have been identified in conjunction with Neil McInnes from the Library Service. As Julie says, the technology that we're looking to develop, we're trying to make it as quick and easy for residents as possible. So we've been working very closely with ICT colleagues around what that technology might need to look like based on making it quick and easy. And as Julie says, the technology that we're looking to move forward with is very much an all-in-one terminal. The resident themselves will go into a private space, which has been identified within those 3 libraries, take a seat, and then the member of staff who's conducting that appointment, that face-to-face video conferencing appointment, starts that appointment from their terminal. They will appear on the screen, and then that's when the video conferencing appointment will commence. But yeah, very much these 3 libraries which have been identified are just the start of a pilot around this. So that's where we're up to with developing that particular pilot scheme and the technology which will support that.
Great. I think it's worth me raising at this point that when we discussed this in the pre-meet, I think literally every councillor wants a face-to-face service in their local library. Every councillor wants video conferencing in their local library. And in order to make the meeting run smoothly, we agreed that we wouldn't have that lobbying process on screen, because literally every single one of us was going to want to say, but I want it in Northern Library, or, I want it for my residents. So what would be really helpful is potentially if we could have a discussion subsequently around, what's the initial rollout phase, what's the final version, where will it be possible to offer services from, and that might be a conversation that's best to have outside the committee meeting. Councillor Murphy, do come in.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think it's rightful that members want to lobby for the services in their ward, and that's why we need to make sure the pilot works and make sure we can actually sort out any of the issues that can come through, so we can actually make sure we get the best service for residents, because this, while obviously it's going to be a huge change, we want to make sure it's working and actually better for people having to traipse into town, that they can actually do it locally and make sure the staff have got that right support. So, well, let's get the trials, prove the work, and then, yes, we'll look at how we can roll it out, because we want to actually provide the right service to Manchester residents, and that's a lot easier on the doorstep than it is having to travel either to Longsight or Blakely or Wythenshawe, because that's the same issues as sometimes travelling to the town hall. But yeah, happy to work with members on that.
Councillor Murphy, it might just be worth me adding just in terms of timelines around the pilot scheme. So what we're looking to have in place is those 3 initial identified library locations up and running with video conferencing technology in January. So by early in the new year, that's when we're looking to launch the pilot.
Lovely, thank you very much. I think it's worth noting members were all individually very keen to have face-to-face services in their own libraries, as well as in the video conferencing services as well. My questions relating to this partly related to that. So I was unclear from the report if the plan is to have 6 core staff and some other staff delivering this service, or if it's 6 staff in total. And if so, how many staff do we currently have delivering it?
So I'll come in there. The At the moment, there's about 18 staff providing the customer service centre. We haven't provided any face-to-face services since March, either in libraries or in the customer service centre. This new model only provides face-to-face at the customer service centre, and elsewhere will be by video conferencing. The 6 people will be in the centre based in the town hall, and they will be doing the meet and greet and any face-to-face inquiries that are required. What we can use for video conferencing longer term is we've got a group of contact centre staff, and we've got the people who are the core 6, because people within the customer service organisation are on generic job descriptions, but at the moment it's envisaged that the 6 people will be a core group of people doing the meet and greet and any appointments that are required face-to-face at the town hall. So we won't be doing appointments face-to-face in libraries.
Right, I think perhaps I had misunderstood the report. Had others understood this the way that Julie had just described? I'm seeing some shaking of heads here. I'm a little bit concerned that, so it sounds like I'm not the only one who's had this misapprehension. I thought that what we were going to do is we were going to have video conferencing available from libraries like 5 days a week or whatever. But then, you know, there'd be a member of staff in Wythenshawe Library once a week. There'd be a member of staff in Longsight Library once a week, so that people could get that face-to-face if they needed it.
The person who's been going to the library, a lot of it's validation, and we don't need that anymore. So we've worked through, so we don't need people providing us with original documents and going to go and see a member of staff who says, yeah, that's the original, I'll give you that back and I'll certify it and send it back to you. So we don't think we need that service for validation across library sites, across the city by appointments. The vast majority of appointments, when people phoned up for a specific appointment, were sorted out over the phone. We were finding out that when people were wanting appointments, say at Wythenshawe Library to see an advisor, when we phoned them back and went through the details with them, we sorted it out for them over the phone. We don't believe it's required for validation across library sites. We've got other things that the COVID pandemic has allowed us to develop different ways of working. We're accepting scanned and photographs. We're also, because of universal credit, there's been change over a number of years that no longer requires people to give evidence of their housing benefit claim or their council tax support claim, because the only original documents we need are the ID and national insurance number, and we shouldn't have people having to provide that if we don't need to. So we've done quite a lot of work on what we're asking people, what evidence we're asking people to provide.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Simcock and then Councillor Ali, please.
Well, just on that point that Julie was making, Chair, I mean, where I got the my clearly mistaken view is page 39, 9.13. First bullet point says face-to-face appointment with a fully trained customer service member of staff, venue at appropriate location. I was reading that the member of staff would be in one of those libraries, say, face-to-face with a resident by appointment. So it would be they'd make an appointment, they'd go and see them face-to-face. That was my understanding of that, but maybe I've got that wrong, and I'm sure somebody can correct me. The question I had, and actually it's just worth taking a step back here, I suppose, is that when I'm comparing what the City Council provides by comparison with many of the other organisations that people these days interact with, and I'm thinking about, in my case, my bank, inquiries tracking deliveries online, Amazon, trying to get through the Police 101 facility. What the council currently provides is very much a superior service. And even with these reductions, it's going to be a much better service than most of these people offer. Trying to have a telephone conversation with any of those organisations that I've just mentioned is nigh on impossible. And we'll still have a very good service. There was one question I wanted to ask was, there are several references to co-browsing of the council's website with real-time online support provided by customer service staff. Is that similar to the support that I've been getting recently from our IT team? I think it's worth giving a name check here to Satnam, to say, basically, he takes control of my computer and shows me exactly how to perform particular functions on there. Is that the sort of thing we're describing, Chair? I'd be interested to know more. If it is, then great, because I've certainly learnt a lot from watching that cursor moving around the screen at speed. Thank you.
Okay, Lee will bring in the detail about the co-browsing. Just to be clear about the library service, if somebody needs an appointment in a library, so that's more convenient for them, we would look where it's convenient for them to meet. So if they need a face-to-face and they could do it by the online digital and go into the library and do it that way, we don't need to send a member of staff to the library to do it. There's other things that might need support, things like helping complete a claim form, that we still do. It should be noted that for registered provider tenants, the housing staff do that all the time anyway, so there's not a lot being taken away. Where we're talking about where an appointment is required, that will be at a venue that's most appropriate for that person's specific needs, rather than us having Julie goes to the library every Tuesday. It's about what suits that specific resident, and if the new trial works for them, then we don't need to do that. But if that didn't work for them and it was better for us to go to their home after COVID and stuff, you know, if say somebody was, I don't know, seriously ill or gravely ill and needed a home visit, we can still do home visits. It's about what's right for the specific circumstances, and that's what we're trying to do. Lee, do you want to cover the point about the co-browsing and what people see?
Yes, thanks, Julie. And yes, Councillor Simcock, that's exactly as you described. So the co-browsing capability, which we now have and can be developed as part of our new telephony platform, is very much around just providing that real-time digital support. So we can see what the resident has seen on their screen. We can look at if it's an online form where they are stuck in a certain field or they're not quite sure what that means. We do have, as part of the new telephony platform, the ability to develop that co-browsing capability, so that we can actually then talk that resident through whilst they're online, so that hopefully in the future, when they do go online, they won't come across the same barriers because we provide that online support. So absolutely, that experience that you've described is pretty much the solution which we describe within the report. It's also worth noting, I think, just in terms of Councillor Simcock's comments in relation to other channels and so on. One of the key enhancements that we've recently gone live with, and it is again referenced within the report, is the callback functionality. So again, many of you may have experienced when you contact centres, if there is a queue in place, so you're not connected directly to a customer service member or staff. What we now have the ability to do, and this has recently gone live on our council tax and benefits lines, and will be rolled out in the next 3 to 4 weeks across all contact centre lines, is for the ability for residents to hold their position in the queue. Their position in the queue remains. They can get on with whatever they were doing. They don't need to stay on the line listening to hold music or etc. When their call gets to the top of the queue, there's an automated callback which is made to the resident at no cost to the resident, so no call charges are related to that particular interaction or outbound call. There's no call charges to the council because it's already inclusive as part of our technology package with our new telephony provider, and we can make that outbound call and connect directly back to the resident. So again, I think that's just another example of some of the enhancements that we now have, or we are currently in the process of implementing as part of the new technology we have available to us.
Sorry, can I just come in as well? The thing what we need to remember as well, we're talking about revenues and benefits calls here. So a lot of people have got the documents in front of them and it can be sorted out on the majority of times over the phone. Most people just want to talk to people rather than face to face. And that's what we found. So when people were phoning through and asking for an appointment, when we got through to them and said, what is it? And they'll say, I've had a reminder, I've had a summons. And we say, well, we've done this. Can we do this? Can we sort this? Are you doing this? It doesn't need it. We're talking about a lot of the time, which are bureaucratic, important processes. But yeah, that's where we've found is that most people just want decent advice rather than face to face.
Yeah, I can well imagine that. Councillor Simcock, did you have a follow-up question, or are you?
It was just a very quick point, Chair. I wondered whether Lee could pass all the details of that service on to Royal Bank of Scotland.
Thank you for that, Councillor Simcock. I have been struggling a little bit, bluntly, to follow the conversation and make sure that I have considered all the questions that I know people might have, the questions they might have developed and so forth. So I'd be very grateful if everyone could indulge me for a moment. I understand Councillor Ali has a question regarding some of this.
Chair, thank you. Very quickly, I'm very warmly welcome the comments Julie has just made in terms of the transaction and face-to-face meetings. My question is this: in terms of, this could be Nigel could be answering this. In terms of kind of rationale for the three centres within Shaw, Blakely, and Longside, what sort of model did you use? You know, in terms of analysis or customer usage, whatever. What's the rationale for these three centres as opposed to the other places? Thanks.
I could be wrong, but I think we were looking quite basically of north, central and south and some of the larger centres that could actually be used. And it kind of gave a bit of a cross-section of the community of Manchester. But that's my recollection of the conversations we've had. Am I right, Julie?
Yeah, it was north, central and south, and it was where the library had a good spaced interview room because of COVID that we could use fairly quickly and kit out and make it COVID secure without impacting on other things that the library had to do.
Just a supplementary on that, in terms of GDPR issues and privacy, you've taken in, I'm sure, measures there. Will there be a person actually, excuse the word, manning it?
There'll be staff there available to make sure that the electronic interaction is taking place, but it's in a private room, so the confidentiality remains with the customer or the resident that has the query. So there's somebody there to assist them if there's a technology error, but the data sharing is with the customer service agent, the same way it would be in a face-to-face.
Yeah, just to add to that, Councillor Murphy, absolutely, that is the model that we're developing. So library staff will be on hand to support residents who, should they come across any issues in relation to using the technology, etc. But as we've said, we've developed a technology which literally takes it out of the hands of residents, and basically all of the actions is for our members of staff to take forward to start that appointment. So the library staff will be on hand. We're working very closely with Neil McInnes on that. And, absolutely the working relationship between customer services and libraries is really effective. So we'll continue to work really closely with libraries around making sure that residents get that support they need when accessing council services via that route.
And the key thing that we wanted to do as well was make it like you were having a private interview, so it was private. So you're not sat at a desk in the main library with people walking around you and you're just having a camera in front of you. It's like being in a private interview room as one-to-one. And that's one of the challenges we're going to have with the libraries that we choose, because I think it really is important that we make those spaces secure so those honest and open dialogues can take place in a secure space and they're not being overheard by other people who might be walking past or using the library.
Just to add to that, just within the report itself, it does actually, within the appendix, one of the appendix, it actually shows photographs of the identified private interview spaces within the report. So we've added that so you can see the physical space that we've identified to support that initial pilot.
Thanks. And just to add to that, really, I'd like to thank Julie and Lee for the work that they've done. I think what did become very apparent is the current customer centre, well, pre-COVID customer centre offer is no longer the right one for our residents. And there's been a lot of learning from during this period. And a lot of, as Julia's outlined, different ways of dealing with issues such as validation. So I'd just like to say I support taking that different direction in how we deliver this in the future. The standard offer is as outlined, and that does give us a bit of space and capacity to learn from the pilots, to learn from the model it's rolled out, and make sure we use, you know, the limited resources that the council has to the best effect to provide the support where it's needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I bring Councillor Culley in, and then I have some comments? If anyone else still has unanswered questions, please can they pop them in the chat for me?
Thank you, Chair. Wholly agree with the comments regarding face-to-face access that could be delivered through libraries in local areas. So yeah, obviously, and the support for the technology as well, where that's a technological component in those facilities is important. I just wanted to bring attention to one of the suggestions for what services would and would not be delivered face-to-face from the Town Hall in future, and that's regarding in 5.3 housing solutions and the homelessness service, whether for rough sleepers or other homeless people. And I do think I would be reluctant to see a situation where we don't offer a direct face-to-face homelessness service for those that need it in the Town Hall, and that all the referral is done through partner agencies. I think as a vital service, which is a kind of bottom line protection for our residents, that there should be the facility for that to be accessed in the Town Hall face to face by those who do need it. And obviously it could be more appropriate and more convenient for people to access it in other ways. But if you remove that, then that I think is problematic. And I just wondered if there's any comments on that, because obviously homelessness is one of the really important, crucial services we have to deliver.
Councillor Culley, I'll take that. We've been responding to what the service areas who we support have requested that they want in their new model. So I suppose if there's questions about the homelessness model, that would have to be taken to them, because we've just asked them what they want, how we can support them, and making sure that that customer service hub supports whatever model they're working towards in the future. So I can take that away and maybe get the Director of Homelessness to provide something about how they see that new model working, but that's their request at the moment, has been for, and that's what we've responded to.
Thank you very much for that. I am concerned about the homelessness triage service from a slightly different perspective, in that we've had, in 2019-20, it looks like we had, so basically homelessness inquiries have gone up by about 2,000 a year for the last 3 years. They, I imagine, will not have been rising at the same rate during the last 6 months or so, because there's been eviction holidays. I suspect as that comes to an end, we're going to see a sudden, absolutely massive spike in evictions and a real peak of homelessness. So I was wondering what we've done to ensure there's enough capacity in the system to deal with that kind of sudden peak. It's probably worth saying, I suspect there will also be large numbers of people sadly claiming benefits for the first time who have no experience of navigating those systems as well.
I can deal with the ones claiming benefits for the first time, because what tends to happen is they go to universal credit, and decisions that we as a council have made earlier have made that a lot smoother. So for example, when they claim their universal credit, they automatically, if they tick, we will count that as a claim for council tax support. So they get the claim paid for council tax support, trying to make it as joint as possible. And I think new benefit claimants would be want the support, but a lot of them want to do it by phone, and the co-browsing would support that. So I think we've got that covered, and we are getting the new claims through and helping people and dealing with things like DHP for those, and for people who have we've also extended some DHP claims over this period as well to try and assist people as well. I think for the homelessness triage numbers, I think we just have to pass that on to homelessness at the moment, because they have been picking that up during this period, and the customer service centre's not had any model during the last 7 months. So I would have to ask the Director of Homelessness, because we've just not got that data.
It's slightly, am I not really concerned? I'm not fully understanding this, because so 4.2 says housing solutions, homelessness triage inquiries generate the greatest demand within the customer service centre, while the volume of document drop-off and validation in relation to council tax and benefits has reduced significantly. So are you saying that that will just cease to be something that your team field? Or I don't understand.
The position... Well, we'll respond to what homelessness wants us to do. There will be an element of triage, but the things that they've set up to triage their service will mean that people won't have to come to the town hall. That's the view that... Lee, do you want to come in? Because that's my understanding of what's being described by the service.
Yeah, so that they, in terms of their emerging model, and again, I think it is a conversation for the homelessness service, but my understanding from our engagement is that the model which they've been operating during the pandemic has been very much around the telephony-based initial triage and then appointments. So my understanding is, based on the conversations engagement we've had with the homelessness service, is that they're looking to move towards that initial triage, telephony-based triage, and continue that approach, and then support that by appointments. So based on the current proposals, the interaction that the customer service staff will have from a homelessness perspective will be around individuals who present who have a pre-arranged appointment, or if they present and there needs to be an urgent response, there'll be a process whereby we can call upon support from the homelessness service to support that particular presenting individual if they do present at the town hall extension. But as Julie says, that new model is what the homelessness service are currently developing, and that initial triage supported by a pre-arranged appointment from our engagement is the model that they want to take moving forward, as well as obviously working with partners and outreach around how they can proactively engage with rough sleepers, etc. At those particular touch points where they present, so working very much alongside partners in that respect.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that we are probably coming towards the close of this item. I have some outstanding concerns that I'm still not sure that I completely understand the model, but from what I do understand of it, I would like it, if it was possible, for us to know in due course the number of people who are requesting face-to-face and who subsequently get it, and kind of what customer service follow-up we're doing to make sure that people are definitely getting what they need. What worries me is that actually if people don't get what they need early on in the process, then their lives become difficult, and that it creates costs elsewhere in the system, and it's worse for those individuals, which is all kind of terrible. I understand that Councillor Davies had a point that she didn't was unable to make earlier, so we'll bring that.
Yeah, on this discussion on the homelessness service, we're obviously anticipating that there could well be a number of people who are facing homelessness but are currently housed. I think when people use the term homelessness, they often equate it with rough sleepers, and I assume that the outreach service and the going out, walking out into the city centre and having people physically present at the town hall extension would still be on offer and available for people who are rough sleeping. It may well be that the team we've got here today are not au fait with all the levels of provision, but I assume that is still going ahead on a face-to-face basis. It's a core part of the job that they do, the rough sleepers team particularly.
Chairman, if I come in, I think Joan's right with what she's saying. I think we've got to remember that since March, that the customer service centre hasn't been open. We've had to work on different delivery models that are there. And I know there's a full paper going tomorrow to the neighbourhood scrutiny on the homelessness provision, which is looking at how that service has been provided and how we're moving forward with that. This is looking at how we can interact and give the best service and the fastest service really to people, because people waiting for appointments actually slows things down, which is what I think we've been talking about. So actually making sure we can actually get that help to people where needed in the best possible way for that person. But as you say, we don't want to make sure that people aren't falling through any cracks to start off with. So I think that's part of the reason we want to do the trials, to check we've actually got everything in place. And once we've got that, we can actually make the adjustments that are needed to ensure that people don't fall any cracks at the early stage, because that does make things difficult further down the line. So I think it's just showing the direction of travel we are looking to go in, and working with yourselves as to how we can best deliver for the Manchester residents.
And I understand that the leader would like to make a comment. Then I'm going to bring in Councillor Cllr, and then we are going to wrap this up.
I think try to restrict the comment to customer service, because we are. I think there's a risk of getting into a discussion about homelessness policy. But clearly, throughout the period of time that Councillor Murphy was talking about, in terms of the weekly SITREP report that goes to senior management team, and then myself, Councillor Murphy, and Councillor Craig, then homelessness presentations and how we respond to that has been consistently part of that. And I think this goes with what Lee and Julie were saying about what the service desires, is that over that period of time, the service has found more effective ways of working, which is to maintain those. Actually, presentations have been maintained at a pretty steady rate over that period of time. They've not disappeared, but I think they have found more effective ways, and I think ways of being able to respond to people more quickly, and quite often working the preventative way we want to be able to work more effectively. I think there is a danger of seeing a very ineffective, because it's very visible. Because it's very visible doesn't mean it's necessarily very effective.
I don't think anyone's really disputing the idea of fundamentally changing the model. I think our concerns are more around ensuring that adequate homelessness, well, not adequate, but like good quality homelessness support is absolutely maintained, and that people who will really struggle with non-face-to-face access can continue to achieve some face-to-face access. I don't think anyone's disputing the idea that we should make best use of technology. You know, obviously going back to poor ways of working is not a movement forward. I think Councillor Cllr has one last question, which we'll keep very brief, and then we'll move on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just the concern around people who are not rough sleepers, but people who are facing eviction, and at the moment they basically are not dealt with until they are very close to eviction. They have Section 21 or possession hearings. So if we're going to have an appointment-based system and remote access, the way that that's done, I'd be concerned that people obviously will not be in that situation until they're in that situation. Therefore, it might be quite difficult to manage that. So how that's done, I guess, is more for the homelessness service, but it's a concern.
Thanks, Councillor Cllr. I'm sure that will be taken back to the homelessness service, and it sounds like neighbourhoods are going to be picking that area of work up, and I'm sure will do their usual comprehensive job. I think thank you very much for the report, which was really helpful and informative, and please do keep us updated on how everything goes. I don't think there are any recommendations coming out of that specifically, unless anyone wants to disagree with me or has something they want to bring to the table. I shall assume that silence is golden, and thank everyone very much for their time. Can we move on to the reports about Manchester Fair, please? I don't know if anyone wants to introduce this. I can see Councillor Rahman's taking his mic off. Sorry, putting his mic on, so please do.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a few comments actually in introducing this report. The proposal in front of you in this report is to withdraw from the provider market for school dinners. And I just want to put into context and some clarity around what this is. This is nothing to do with free school meals. It isn't essentially a auto service reduction, and there are no job losses proposed in this proposal. I'll come back to jobs shortly toward the end of my comments, but just to put a bit of context in terms of the service and how it's been running. We don't have responsibility or the budget. We don't hold the budget for the school dinners. That lies with the schools themselves. And that decision was taken, I think, just over 10 years ago, when that budget was delegated to schools, so that schools, through procuring their school dinners, if there's any savings that they realise from that, they can use on teaching and learning. And indeed, many of our schools have been making some savings and using that additional resource on teaching and learning for children and young people in their schools. However, that has meant that schools have had the liberty to choose their providers, and from the 185 schools that we have, 110 of them over the years have left us and sought alternative providers or have provided the school dinner service in-house. Therefore, that has obviously put a pressure on our ability to be able to achieve economies of scale and to be able to continue to provide the school dinner service and make the business a sustainable business. This is not simply a commercial decision. If it was a commercial decision, then we would have sought to withdraw from the provider market in 2018 when we started suffering losses for the first time. We were and we still are committed to making sure that the staff and the jobs within this service is protected, and therefore in 2018, when we began to lose a number of schools and the business was moving into a loss situation, what we did was we used the reserves that were accumulated within the service to continue subsidising the service whilst we explored options that could make potentially the business sustainable, which haven't come to fruition. And we are in a situation where in this financial year we're potentially looking at up to £600,000 subsidy, and in following years up to £1 million subsidy. I don't think that we could reasonably justify spending public funds on subsidising a service that we neither have the responsibility for or neither do we hold the budget for. In terms of the jobs, as I said, we were committed, and that therefore we continue to explore options. We're still committed to staff. All the frontline staff are subject to 2P and would be protected under that. Having said that, we won't just hand over this. So we will work with our schools and our with trade unions and other stakeholders to ensure that there's a smooth transition, and that staff who are 2P'd over are 2P'd over on the same terms as they're currently receiving from Manchester Fair. That work will continue right up until the point when the schools transfer over to a new provider. We have also been having discussions with a number of other local authorities in Greater Manchester to see if there are any potential options there. And to finish off, and Matthew's on the call, and Matthew can talk through a little bit more detail around most of this stuff, but to finish off, we are looking at potentially 2 providers who have been in touch and are interested in taking all the 74 schools that we have, which will mean that all staff would be transferred. And so the basis of our transfer to those would be that they maintain the current terms and conditions, that they commit to paying the Manchester living wage, that that all staff are transferred over on the same working conditions that they are currently on. And Matthew can talk a little bit more around that details. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
So my first question is about the application of TUPE. And so how is it that we propose to secure the terms and conditions of these staff in the event that we transfer them over? Because you've just described doing so, but I'm not clear what mechanism we could use to do that.
If I could answer that question, Chair. TUPE would obviously apply to all the staff on an individual site basis as it currently stands. So if a school chose to take the service in-house, then the staff would TUPE over to them. And if they chose their own independent provider, then the staff who worked in that kitchen would effectively TUPE to that provider. We would work with our HR and pension colleagues to ensure that that TUPE process takes place. So the TUPE process would take place from the City Council in terms of Manchester Fair to the new provider or the school. And the terms and conditions are therefore protected when the new provider has to take on and gain admission body status into the pension fund.
No, the terms and conditions are not protected. The terms and conditions are protected unless there's an economic, technical or organisational reason entailing changes to the workforce which requires a reduction in those terms and conditions and or redundancies, at which point those terms and conditions immediately cease to be effectively protected. So I think it is very unlikely in the middle of a global pandemic that the TUPE provisions will successfully protect these employees. So where you were saying that they will be protected by TUPE, it is my considered professional opinion that they are highly unlikely to be protected by TUPE. And it's worth noting that I have worked as an employment lawyer in the outsourcing industry. So when I give my professional opinion on that, it's a really well-informed one. So Councillor Rahman, when you say that we are going to find a mechanism to protect them, if what you mean is that we are going to use TUPE to protect them and rely on its basic provisions, I'm terribly sorry and really disappointed that that simply won't be effective for our staff. I wish it would. I think it is appalling that the government leaves people so unprotected in the event of transfer. But I think we have to face the reality that if we choose to do this, TUPE is not going to protect these people. We may decide that we are going to do it anyway, but let's not do it on a false premise that these people's jobs will all be safe, because they probably won't.
Thank you, Chair. I think, I take your professional opinion, but I think you're making assumptions here, because unless we've gone through that process, I don't think we can 100% determine whether those terms will be protected. I think what I did say to you was we are committed to making sure that the terms and conditions that the staff are currently on are protected. And what we've got to remember is that the schools are also public bodies and also spending public bodies and public money, and have the same duty towards their staff to make sure that their staff are employed in fair conditions. And we will work with the schools and with the alternative providers, whether that's the school decides to take it in-house or whether they decide to procure the services from another provider. We will, of course, support our staff to make sure that they remain on the terms that they're currently on. I accept that that may not be the case all the time, but of course, equally, I also don't want to preempt what may or may not happen through this process.
Can I bring in Councillor Wright, please?
Yeah, can I just ask what process we've gone through with the trade unions about this? I mean, I'm not an employment lawyer, but I'm a trade union rep, and it does seem to me that in the course of the last question, we've accepted that we've moved away from guaranteed protection of terms and conditions. So I know that some of the trade unions at least are not happy with the process that's been gone through with them. So can you just outline what process of negotiation and consultation you've had with the trade unions, please?
We have consulted with the 3 trade unions around this. It's also been discussed with some of the education-based trade unions at the JCC with Amanda Cochrane. We have shared the report with them that has come to this committee, and we have talked them through the process in terms of what's been proposed.
Do you think that's good enough?
I think it is the normal consultation that we would undertake in relation to such proposals.
And then we've got a very poor process of industrial relations going on, haven't we? If what we do is say we're doing this and we'll show you, excuse me, so no wonder the GMB and Unite and the NEU at least are not happy with this situation.
Can I ask, I believe Councillor Priest has a question. Can I suggest that he comes in next?
Thank you, Chair. This isn't the first time that we've had this discussion about this element of the council's operation, and there is a question that has been asked before, and I'm sorry if it sounds as though I'm bringing back history, but The question is, how can a provider deliver this service so much cheaper than we appear to be able to do, unless it is because they're buying cheaper food? Don't think that's the case, because nutritional standards are defined. Or is it because they're paying less for the staff, which is the bulk of the costs? And I can't work out how it can be other than that they're paying less for the staff. And in this city of ours, we have a very large number of low-paid people, and it's one of our objectives to increase the average take-home pay of our residents. I think this is going to look as if what we're saying is, if you're low paid, we're happy to see you paid less. And I do wonder whether the presentation of this is going to be really quite difficult, because it does look as though a group of workers who are low paid, mostly women, are going to be the victim of what I suppose is a government budget cut, but it's our decision about how we implement it. And I feel very uncomfortable about how this will appear to a number of the people I represent. It isn't going to make an easy story to tell. I'd like us to understand why it is that we have failed over the years to maintain the school contracts, because the bulk of them are not doing it in-house, which I could understand. They're outsourcing it. Why can we not compete in that market? Unless it is because we pay a decent wage, in which case I would like to see us struggle to maintain that situation, since these are low paid, mostly women, and should not be the first point of application of cuts. So that's my view, and I would like to know whether Councillor Luthfer, whether Luthfer Rahman and Matthew Bennett can offer me an alternative story as to why we are unable to compete in this market.
Yeah, I can answer your point to a certain extent. In relation to why the other companies can provide it cheaper, part of that is down to food procurement and the operational economies of scale that they've got. So you are talking about national providers who've got many millions of pounds of procurement buying power effectively for food, and they do get a better price than those, there's no doubt about that, despite the fact we use an aggregate contract. You've also got the operational economies of scale in terms of the number of sites they're delivering to. And that's part of the problem that we've experienced within Manchester Fair, as the number of schools have chosen. So there's about 120 schools have chosen an alternative provider, which reduces the operational economies of scale for the service. And you're quite right that there will be something in there around terms and conditions for the staff as well, in terms of obviously the GMPF is an additional cost in relation to the Manchester City Council provision that the independent providers obviously don't have access to, and they probably don't provide a comparable pension scheme to that. So there will be a small element of it in there. In terms of why we've been unable to maintain the school contracts, we have tracked over the years the reasons the schools have given us for going elsewhere, and in the past it has largely been on price. More recently, it's been around flexibility and wanting to take control of the service themselves. They're the reasons that they've given us, but effectively now we are down to less than 1/3 of the schools within Manchester, which does significantly impact the economies of scale.
Can I have Councillor Sam Wheeler, please?
Yes.
No, apologies. Sorry, Councillor Wheeler. Councillor Ali had a point that he wanted to make that I think relates more directly to this, and then I'd love to bring you in afterwards. Sorry about that. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I'll be very brief. Just taking on what Bernard has mentioned about women mainly being affected. I mean, all the trade unions are saying there's going to be a disproportionate impact on the women who are working, women who are trying to make life-work balance. And as a city, we relish on equality, and we know women get less paid, something like 18%. There's a pay gap as well in terms of. As a city, I think we should be looking at innovative ways in which the Tories' cuts are having an impact, but as we in the city, we deal with things differently. And as such, I think, taking on Bernard's point, we should be looking at innovative ways in which we can actually make sure these people who are working, who are contributing to our city's economy. I mean, Richard often talks about health, money, and a job. So those things, those are key things, and we don't want anyone to lose their job. So that's my question, really. Why can we not positively look at developing and maintaining that workforce for our city? Thank you.
Chair, do you want me to? Yeah, I just want to just kind of respond to the job losses, and I think we just need to be very clear that, of course, that all the points that you've raised, Chair, and all the members of the committee have raised around the challenges in making sure that terms and conditions are maintained under this 2P process are accepted, and of course we're committed to working with trade unions and the schools to make sure to as much extent as we possibly can to support that. But what we've got to understand here, we're not proposing any job losses here. All those staff are protected under 2P, and there may be questions around the ability for 2P to work effectively in these circumstances. But we're looking at a subsidy of between £600 to £1 million on this occasion, where I don't think, in my view, that we can reasonably justify spending that level of public money on subsidy for a service that we don't have the responsibility for or the budget for. But equally, if we don't make this, let's say hypothetically that we continue to subsidise this, then we're talking about £1 million, up to £1 million of saving elsewhere in the budget, which will actually mean job cuts and service reductions.
Can I have Councillor Wheeler next, please?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just on responsibility, whether the Tory legislation gives legal responsibility to us or not, I think we are all responsible for Manchester's children, ultimately. I think that's our job on this council. But just some points that have come up in the discussion. I'd like clarification from the officer who said that this now serves less than a third of schools, because that's not what the report says. The report says 37%, which is more than a third. So I'd like clarification on the numbers, because I don't like the idea we've been given a report that has the wrong numbers in. Secondly, on the point about, I feel that we need to use the word that is actually being described here, because when we say there are a couple of companies that are looking to take our market share, that's outsourcing. That's about outsourcing this service to someone else permanently. I mean, that by definition, that is what it is. I think it's important to talk about that. I find it baffling that a 37% market share is not enough for an economy of scale, given that that's a bigger share than any supermarket has of the UK grocery industry. It's about twice what Asda has. So if we can't make economies of scale work on that basis, I'm seriously concerned. Further on that, the fact that we have companies who want to pick up our portfolio of schools indicates that they think there is money to be made here. No, it's not the case that this can't go through entirely. And therefore, as has been pointed out, either this is an issue of food quality, which we don't think it is, or it's an issue of lowering staff terms and conditions, or the last point, which is that some other providers, whether they are in-house, and I know that Salford through Citywide does provide this service in-house and does at £2.10, which is less than us, so perhaps we could find out how they did it. But that's done essentially through a form of infrastructure. And I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we have the Section 151 officer on the call and say that if we were to reform the structure of the service in terms which would make it a transformation project under local authority funding, can she confirm that we could use capital funding in order to reform Manchester Fair because it would be saving that revenue spend in coming years? Can she confirm that? And can Councillor Rahman confirm whether anyone has looked into using transformation and capital funding in order to save this service? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I had asked if I could come in and comment anyway. I think the first point that we need to know is we're not operating in a perfect world here, nor are we the decision makers for this service. We're talking about this as if we're making a decision at this point in time. And if we didn't decide to go with this option, there would be no more cheapy transfers. Clearly, schools are voting, have unfortunately been voting with their feet over a period of years, which has put us in this position. As the budget is delegated, it is the school's decision on where they choose their catering provider from. I think I respect the judgment of the officers that it is very difficult to make this service one that will deliver a financial return for the council or break even within the constraints that we have. Councillor Wheeler has sort of referenced some of the flexibilities local authorities have around capital receipts. Capital receipts can be applied on a limited basis to support transformation projects. That is the technically correct answer, where we're confident that there will be a future return, but that is something that local authorities would need to do carefully. One of the issues with another local authorities, they took that to the absolute max and left themselves in a very difficult financial position afterwards. And in terms of looking at our funding sources, it's all trading use receipts for one thing. We can't use them for something else. So there are always decisions to be made. I do think this discussion is a challenging one, and it's unfortunate we're in this position with the school catering service. But I would reiterate that first point, that this is a service that has been declining over a number of years, and the decisions to transfer to another provider aren't ours. From the point of, if we make the decision to continue with the service today, it is down to the individual schools and their governing bodies what decisions they'd want to take.
Can I have Councillor Hitchin next, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing this back in, Councillor Rahman, for bringing this report back to the scrutiny as well. I have a number of questions, and quite a few of them have already been asked previously by other members of this committee. However, on the website, there is a reference to how much a school meal costs, and in the report it states that it's £1.60. However, in the report it states it's £1.30. However, I'm a little bit confused because it said it's a bad comms, so I'm just wondering in relation to that link, and I know it's been answered previously, but it's still on the website of how much a school meal costs. Secondly, we also this report also clearly states that it's a GM procurement hub, and I'm just wondering in relation to the GM procurement hub and MCC, do we get VAT relief off this when we're actually doing the procurement? Because obviously as a council, we are VAT exempt to some extent, and I'm wondering if that cost has been put forward. And then my final question is, I did raise a question at council, and I know Councillor Russell may want to add to this as well, which is in relation to a Greater Manchester-wide strategy. What has been done to look at that and in that options as well, please?
Thank you. I'll come back on those. In relation to the meal price, the price that Manchester Fair charges to schools is £2.30. What the schools choose to charge the parents is entirely within their gift. They can subsidise that if they wish. The amount that's on the website is £2.60. We have asked for it to be removed, and I will chase that up to make sure that it is either removed or corrected. In terms of VAT relief, I'll defer to Carol on that one, although there doesn't tend to be VAT on food anyway, so it's unlikely that it will make a great deal of difference. In terms of a GM-wide model, that's a much more challenging one. It comes back to the point that was made at the start around the delegation of budgets. So a number of local authorities never delegated budgets in the way that Manchester did to the schools. So, for example, Salford, as was previously referenced in relation to its school meal price of £2.10, they didn't delegate money to schools, they retained it and used it to effectively subsidise their service delivery and therefore the price that they charge. Because we have that different model and a different way of delegating budgets to schools, it does make it very difficult to then come together as a GM-wide organisation to effectively deliver school meals. There doesn't appear to be any wish to do that. We have spoken to a couple of GM local authorities, and I don't think there's going to be much progress made there. But we will continue to have those conversations to see if something is possible.
So in terms of the response we just had about GM-wide provision, you referenced Salford having a different model. Have we actively explored with the other GM-wide providers whether they would welcome an amalgamation with our service?
We've spoken to 2 of them so far, and we'll continue to make contact with them to see if there is any possibilities. But as I say, because the funding model is different, I do think it's going to be difficult, but we will progress that.
So looking at these figures, I can see that this year, Manchester Fair has made a much larger loss than it had historically, which I think is clearly related to COVID factors and is not in any way surprising. Almost every service across the council has made a much bigger loss than it usually would this year, whether that's parks or anything else. So can I suggest that when we look at this, we essentially disregard this year because this year is abnormal? And if we start closing down anything that didn't make us money this year, we'll just have nothing left. So I understand that there are longer term issues within the service that would require resolution, but what's the actual consistent long-term pattern of loss rather than this year's loss?
Okay, the forecast loss for next year is a minimum of £600,000. Assuming that the meal levels return to pre-COVID levels. And that is on the basis that we maintain the meal price that was set from September at £2.30. The alternative to that, stated in the report, is to increase that meal price by around 10% to nearly £2.60. At that point, the service may be sustainable in terms of the fact it will reach a break-even position, as long as a significant number of schools don't leave the service. Although since the report was originally written, we've already had notice from 4 schools that they will be seeking alternative provision or taking the service in-house. And that is the fundamental problem, that on average there are 6 schools a year that come and decide that they will take the provision from somewhere else, which again impacts on the unit price of the meal being produced and therefore the price that we need to charge for it.
Thank you. Councillor Cllr.
Thank you, Chair. Some great detail in the report on some areas. One thing, however, I think I'd like to draw attention to is the APSI report, in which Manchester Fair was favourably highlighted as a great example of an in-sourced school catering service. Talked about the great social value in terms of additional benefits around nutritional classes and ensuring that we deliver cooking skills across the city to people that need it. That's all done as part of this service. Also, it mentions the high quality of the food, the farm to fork, and the local sourcing of products, which are all great things. These are things that would happen to drive up costs. However, in particular in the nutrition of children, what we're talking about here is something that is essentially investing to save, because good nutrition for children is going to improve their life chances, is going to improve their educational attainment, and is also going to ensure that some of the least well-off children in our city do get decent nutritious meals, at least at schools. And these are all things which, to be frank, we are investing money in other areas to achieve those goals. So perhaps we need to think a little bit outside the box on that. Just in terms of the cost, though, it's clear that cost of the meal is the leading reason why schools are leaving. Now, my question to our officers is, to what extent have we benchmarked with other providers in terms of supply? So have we conducted exercises to reduce our costs? This is an area which would be standard across the industry, and there are other parts of the council that would have some expertise commercially and including in catering, where we have, for example, Manchester Central Catering. Have we looked for advice internally from other people in catering? have we used other commercial experts within the council to try and reduce costs and achieve more economies of scale? Finally, when we're talking about cost as well, we're also talking about what we're actually getting for that. So as I've mentioned, we do want to see our children fed nutritiously. The costs that we've occurred this year are one-off costs. So I think the consideration has to be that if we cut this service now, not only are we putting people's livelihoods in danger, and that's a political decision in terms of a group of workers that is one of the most ethnically diverse in the council, but also predominantly or almost wholly made up of women. And that obviously is a political decision. And finally, the other place that savings could be achieved is through reducing the quality of food, which again is outcomes that we don't wish to see for our children. So any comments on that, please?
Yeah, thank you. In relation to the APSI report, that was written by the catering service, and then obviously it was checked by APSI before they published it. And it is a really good summary of the work that they do and the fantastic work that they do and have done for a number of years. Unfortunately, that hasn't stopped schools from making alternative choices rather than choosing the service, which is why we've ended up in the position that we have in terms of the financial position we face. In relation to the procurement of services within there and the commercial arrangements, we procured food through the AGMA framework, which is the cheapest framework we've got for procuring food at the moment. So we think that is the best that we can achieve. There really isn't very much else in the service in terms of either the management or other services. It's staff and food, and that's pretty much it in terms of the provision. So yeah, sorry, was there a final question that I've missed?
Yeah, so regarding the marketing of the service, what we're doing commercially, what have we done to market this service? So instead of just waiting for schools to leave, we're actively going out to win business.
We go out to a certain extent. We used to do a lot more of it than we do now. And the reason for that is that over the past probably 5 or 6 years, we used to bid for contracts that were put out by schools when they went out to procurement. And we used to approach them to see if they would come back to us. We had one school come back over all that time. And in 2018, as part of the cost savings within the service, we reduced the capacity to do that because basically we weren't successful. And what we tended to find is that if a school went out to procure their service, they did it because they wanted something different from Manchester Fur, for whatever reason that was. So what we've been doing more recently is we've been using the nutritionist and the service manager to go around schools and sell the services effectively in the stuff that was put out to APSI in terms of what we offer, the food to fork, and where the food comes from, and the terms and conditions for staff and things like that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rahman, please do.
I just wanted to come in on the point about the this being a loss this year as a result of COVID. COVID has no doubt increased the level of loss, but this has been a loss-making service for the last 2 years, and we have been subsidising it from the reserves that we built up within the service. So it's not a one-off loss based on COVID. It's been a loss-making service. And on the report, we have outlined the work that we've done over the last 2 years around trying to explore alternative options to make the service more attractive to schools, but also more sustainable in the long term. Unfortunately, none of that has yielded the results that we would have liked to have seen, and therefore we are in the situation that we're in.
Thank you. I understand the leader would like to come in.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of comments, I think, if I may. But first of all, I have to bear in mind that in Manchester, unless schools do the provision of school meals in-house, it is an entirely outsourced service. It is that some schools have chosen to outsource it to, so the larger number of schools have chosen not to, and that number is increasing. But we are a contractor, not a provider, and clearly, as a contractor, that we are struggling in that respect. If you look at the money, is that, and I understand a number of local authorities, not just in Greater Manchester, elsewhere, chose not to delegate funding to schools. We chose to delegate funding to schools, and that basically means that any surplus that comes out of this in the Manchester system, schools get the benefit from that, whereas in other places that doesn't apply. And that was a choice made a very long time ago. But relating to Councillor Wheeler's point about Manchester children being all our responsibility, is that we chose a long time ago to put the maximum amount of funding into schools in order to be able to provide for our children in the way that's most appropriate at a local level. And I can argue whether that's right or wrong. I think it's probably the right thing to do, but that's where we have chosen to put we've chosen to put the money there, and for schools to make decisions about it. I asked a question about what the local authorities do, and basically, effectively, they top slice an element of their running costs off from school budgets, basically, and that's the choice, not the choice we've made. I'm not saying that's wrong either. Those are different choices, and there are reasons why you might make that. I also asked a question, given that, and I'll use the 37% figure. 63% of our schools get their school meals from elsewhere. I know in my own ward, there's only one school still uses Manchester Fair. All the others use other services, some in-house, some using contractors. Is what has happened to people and meals since then. Actually, nutritional standards have been maintained. I know at least one of the schools in my ward basically it's decided to start providing the service themselves so they could increase nutritional standards and increase variety of menus. And I know there are a lot of schools in that respect, and a lot of schools also use very local supply, not so from their immediate facilities. So there are a range of reasons that schools have done. But what we've not seen over that period of time, and certainly no evidence of it, that workforce have been damaged over that period of time. And in some cases, many schools have actually enhanced the position for staff. If there's an offer I did make to GMB, which has not responded to, is that if there were examples of schools or that schools contractors paying below Manchester minimum wage, we would join them in campaigning on that and getting schools to impose that as contract conditions in the same way that we would. So there are, I take your point, Chair, that around TUPE, but there are things that we can do, and certainly schools can do as a contractor to require minimum standards around working conditions, and we ought to be making sure that they do that. I think the last comment I make is, let's be clear, this is not a government, we might be making a lot of government cuts, but this is not a government cut. It's not a budget cut at all. In order to be able to maintain this service, if we just kept the budget the same, we couldn't do it. So in order to maintain this service, it would need a very significant increase in budget. And effectively, what you would have is a public sector paying twice for the same thing, because schools are already funded to provide these services where it's generated through what they collect. And given the position we are in at the moment, whilst I think we ought to do everything that we probably should to maintain working conditions, to maintain jobs, to maintain nutritional standards, we simply cannot afford to put in the amount of money we're talking about as an increase to the budget in the current climate.
Thank you. I understand that several members of the committee, in fact all of the committee, have expressed really serious concern about this potential development. I'm personally concerned that the trade unions are raising concerns about the quality of the equality impact assessment, and I know we haven't seen that. In the pre-meeting, there was significant support for a recommendation that this doesn't proceed in its current form. Can I ask that we make that recommendation? All those in favour, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 Okay, thank you. So there's that recommendation. I would suggest that we would sensibly also recommend, though, that alternatives are explored that involve mergers with other Greater Manchester councils that will enable us to find some economies of scale, which I think it would be really, really remiss of us not to acknowledge are clearly required, but to seek to go through that process in a great deal more detail and continue to maintain the service until we can bring that forward. Can I ask if others are in favour of that? Please say aye.
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 Councillor Davies, I didn't hear you, but you did put your hand, like you turned your mic on, so
Yes.
I assume you want to speak.
Yeah.
Councillor Simcock, are you indicating you'd like to speak or are you voting?
I'd just like to speak very briefly, Chair, just on what you've just
please
said.
do.
I mean, that's been an excellent debate and some great contributions from committee members and responses from officers and the leader and Councillor Rahman. But to my mind, there was lots of questions about the marketing of the service, the campaigning that the leader talked about, working with schools. If that campaigning is effective and schools realise that actually once they start paying decent rates, then we are suddenly competitive again. I wouldn't want us to lose this service. So I'm all in favour of what you've just said, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Then, does anyone else have any other comments they want to make on this report or on or the recommendations? Okay, thank you very much. Then I believe that we can move to the overview report. And I just want to say thank you very much to the officers who've been working on this, because I do understand that it clearly hasn't been an easy thing, and it does sound like a lot of work has been going into it over a sustained period of time. So thank you, and I hope that you understand the nature of our concerns and that we are nonetheless really grateful to you for what you've been doing. But yeah, moving on to the overview report, does anyone have any comments on the recommendations monitor? Questions on the register of key decisions? Comments on the work plan? In that case, I believe we can bring the meeting to a close, and I'd just like to say thank you very much to everyone for their time and for all of the reports, which were all really good. Thank you.
Thank you for keeping us to time, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.